Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Pierre Brosens. He is a author of From Stars to Consciousness, an MIT trained mechanical engineer with a career in space power and laser technology. And he brings a scientist rigor to one of our deepest mysteries, how consciousness develops when identity emerges and what it means for our sense of self. So we'll learn from him also about the new instruments, how what new instruments reveal about neuron activity, how a materialist view of consciousness might coexist with the spiritual, and why understanding our origins expands self-understanding. Welcome to the show, Pierre.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajay.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form, Pierre. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about consciousness. Uh, we'll talk about consciousness. We'll talk about science, and we'll talk about the origins of self and much more. We'll also talk about your book, From Stars to Consciousness. But before that, let's talk a bit about your journey, your background, so that the audience knows who they are listening to.
Well, I was immersed in technology for practically all my working life. And it's upon retirement that I became interested in many of the things I had not the time to study while I was immersed in the profession. So I have a bunch of grandchildren, and some of them at high school age asked me about whether their dogs were conscious. And that seemed like a simple question with an easy answer. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it's not simple at all. And I must have spent 4 years about thinking about it. And in the end, I had put together a story that seemed worthwhile writing down and maybe publish. So this is how From Stars to Consciousness came about.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll come to the book separately, Priya. I want to understand what is it that you are trying to say with what you are talking about, writing about, and want to tell the world at this point in time. These are interesting times, and that is where your views become much more interesting, especially coming from with a mechanical engineer background, space, laser technology, and all.
Well, most of the books about consciousness deal with it either from a spiritual basis or from a very rigorous neuroscientific approach. And I felt that from a scientific point of view, there is no way I can address any of the spiritual questions. And I thought I should leave those aside to the people who specialize in theology and the spiritual world. And I thought that the strict neuroscience also, the strict neuroscience falls short of giving an understandable explanation, at least at the high school level. And I thought I could write about consciousness being an entirely physical consequence.
Absolutely. So entirely physical consequence. How should we understand it? People have heard about consciousness in their own ways at different stages of life. Not and everyone understands it in their own way. I'm not an expert about these things. I have my own understanding of consciousness. How would you want people to understand your understanding of consciousness?
I, I don't want to persuade anyone. I thought that it's looking at the scientific basis of consciousness was an interesting topic, and it, 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 it is not a totally scientific topic. It has objective basis, but it has a subjective basis. We have subjective feel for having consciousness, and we can communicate a bit among humans that feeling because we have a fairly elaborate language. At present time, all we can do is communicate as humans. There are technologies becoming more and more powerful that at some point may enable us to converse with animals that have a high level of vocalizations and exchange ideas and then determine if they seem to have consciousness or not. We might never be able to do it with dogs, but with whales or dolphins or crows, that is conceivable. So
Absolutely. Carry on. Carry on.
no, I just don't feel an urge to change the views of anyone. I just want at the high school level to present how one can look at consciousness both objectively and subjectively.
Absolutely. So, when does our consciousness, develop? Is it when we are a child? Is it that when? Because a lot of people, develop to be different human beings in terms of understanding of self, as well as the stars, the sky, the universe, God, spirituality. Help us understand from that point of view. Is it later on we develop this sense of consciousness, sense of I, not as somebody who
Yeah.
is very innocent like a child?
Well, we know that around 16 months of age, children are able to recognize themselves in a mirror. And that's a test of uh, the of their ability to see themselves, and it develops into a level of consciousness which seems to be totally developed by the time they reach 4 or 5 years of age. What people feel of their consciousness is usually an increase in awareness of who they are, which comes later at puberty and adolescence. And I think the one valuable aspect of the book is that it brings people back to what happened at that stage of life, in puberty and adolescence, that they have sort of forgotten, but which was pivotal to who they became as individuals, what their sense of self comes from.
Absolutely, absolutely, Pierre. Let's bring in your book into this conversation from stars to consciousness. How have you dealt this part that we are talking into your book? Who is this book for from that perspective?
I think the people that have resonated most about the book um, were drawn by the psychological aspects that the book raises. Um, but to do justice to the subject of consciousness, we basically have to face two things. One is, how did the universe, which was just a blend of particles at the outset, for which we have no idea how it happened, and we will never have an idea of how it happened. We have theories, but we don't have any evidence. And well, other than the universe expands and so on. And then at the subjective level, basically the book spends like 10 chapters explaining how the universe transformed from totally inanimate matter all the way to the modern human brain. And at the subjective level, there are one chapter explaining the development of consciousness before puberty and what follows with puberty and adolescence takes another chapter, the final chapter of the book.
Absolutely. So, in terms of looking at the same concept of consciousness from different angles, either somebody who knows about science and somebody who also wants to look at it from a common perspective, from spiritual perspective, from any other perspective that way. Was that a challenge for you, or was that a benefit in terms of expanding your outlook towards this subject?
I feel more comfortable talking with everyday people who are busy in their lives and have lost track of what they knew about the world when they were in high school, and who have an appetite for being brought up to date with the most current advances that have happened. I feel less comfortable with scientific people because they are more immersed in having to be rigorous, and therefore they're more distant from the subjective aspects of consciousness. Those aspects are beyond their reach. They cannot really address them from a scientific point of view. In fact, consciousness was a taboo subject in universities until about 20, 30 years ago, because there was no way to measure or collect scientific observations about subjective consciousness.
Absolutely. But you see, the irony is that, we are finding also answers about consciousness through science itself, maybe technology, some processing device, understanding understanding the concepts better, maybe understanding the language of animals. And in that sense, we will not only understand them, but also more about ourselves, self, and the universe, and many more things that we. So, how do you want science to walk along with these wider aspects of our being and understanding?
Well, it is, I agree with you. There are aspects that have developed that were beyond our ability to test, and they become testable. For instance, the release of hormones when people collide in their ideas. Um, in just husband and wife couples, you find that a remark from one to the other is taken as an attack. It's not literally an attack, but the interpretation of your subconscious brain is that there is a threat, and there is the amygdala part of your brain that releases hormones to fight or escape these threats. And it is known that that release of hormones takes place for about 90 seconds. So there are 90 seconds when a human being responds without the rational control. It is driven by animal response, a reflex. And it's in those 90 seconds that we have to be very careful on how we react, because most of the time the reaction is counterproductive. It provokes another reaction, and these 90 seconds bounce back into other 90 seconds, and so on. And the people remain in conflict without being able to rationalize what's going on. This has become possible because one can test the saliva of a person within 1 or 2 minutes of the release of the hormone, and it can be detected. That's very useful information that is also very helpful in the resolution of conflict. But on the other hand, even the most modern instruments can only detect the firing of literally billions of neurons when your EEG or encephalograms or magnetic detection of fields around your head are measured. What is being measured is that some events in the brain make billions of neurons firing simultaneously or nearly simultaneously, communicate between different parts of the brain, and scientists are limited to just being able to roughly say which part of the brain became activated first and how it propagated to other parts. But that's about it. The part which has been studied extensively and is much better known is vision. Vision for a long time was a total mystery to philosophers. Descartes thought that the brain was a physical object that communicated with a spirit, and that the reason that people could see what their eyes were looking at was that in the spiritual side, there is like a theater that reveals what the eyes are looking at. But what the brain does to see an image is absolutely amazing. All that, some parts of the brain that are well known show that an image is made of little tiny segments of little areas in the retina at each point in the field of vision that detect whether there is an area of constant illumination or a direction in which illumination changes rapidly. And that way, an image is constructed element by element. In the same way, reading has been discovered to involve the reading of letters, not as objects that appear all over as a whole, but the brain actually looks at a letter, at every little segment of the letter, puts it together, and reads the letter. These things have become sort of interesting and well known, but it still leaves us very, very far away from understanding consciousness the subjective aspects of consciousness.
Absolutely, absolutely. Have you wondered or also dealt in the book about why God, universe, whatever we want to tell about it, designed consciousness in different ways for different beings? For human beings, it's different. We continue to still struggle about ourselves. About animals you talked about, who knows, they may have be having their own sort of, sometimes people feel it that way, people are able to understand them, communicate with them much more than any normal person, even dangerous animals. I want to understand what is the purpose of this consciousness, this level of consciousness, and various ways people understand it.
Well, that's a human dilemma. We, in the conclusion of the book, is in fact presenting a very famous painting by Gauguin, who asks in the corner of the painting, who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? And that question has remained with humanity forever. There is, I think, the only choice humans have is to develop a personal philosophy of the life they have and what they want to accomplish. And after that, they're done. There's we are sort of in a prison. Our minds cannot escape this box.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, when we talk of who are we, how should we understand our origins? Should we understand that our origin is, from birth, or is it our origin is the stars and the universe? How should we understand? What is the best way to understand our origin, and in that way understand ourselves?
I think from my perspective, a lot of understanding comes from viewing how a picture of the human brain, how the human brain developed through evolution. The book shows several species of humans, some which survived for 1 million years on Earth with just stones as tools. And for 1 million years, all they could do is attack animals with crude weapons and cut them apart for consumption. And this went on for hundreds of thousands of years. And they survived. They survived through ice ages. They were very resourceful, and in some ways very bright, very intelligent. But what I think is the most useful way of looking at ourselves is, as I said, looking at what happened when puberty struck and how we reacted as adolescents to the situation our life had reached. The fact that as a child, the world is wonderful. It looks like everything is going to protect and shelter the child and feed the child and make the life of the child enjoyable. And then all of a sudden you start to realize that you're mortal, that your parents are not going to be there forever, and that you're going to have to figure out by yourself what you want to do the rest of your life and how you want to live it. And that's when identity develops, when you decide, this is what interests me, this is what I want to devote my energy to. And necessarily becomes your identity.
Absolutely. So, for a normal person, if we look at it from our brain's perspective, from science perspective, if I'm correct, is that we are born, we live, and once the last moments are there, it's done for this. But when we talk of spirituality, that gives the extension to life. Several places, culture, like in India, we believe in rebirth, that we have been here many times and we will continue to come here, or maybe
Yes.
any other planet, I don't know. But that process will continue. That thing about the continuity of the self, maybe not in the same biological form but in a different form, will continue. And that is also the way universe expands, rebuilds, fuses, and creates life in different ways. How do you want to, or how do you reconcile these aspects of our being, our limitation, but then also the extension and the hope that that comes from different cultures as well as spirituality?
No, I entirely agree with your point of view. Um, the, the existence of a spiritual world is possible. There is no way that by scientific argument it can be shown that it exists or it does not exist. It may very well exist. And in fact, part of me hopes that there is a spiritual counterpart, but I have, being an engineer, it's been difficult for me to feel totally reassured that that's the way it is.
Absolutely. So, how should people understand self from the purpose point of view? Why are we here? I know the search is always on, but what is your understanding? How should people understand why are we here? And maybe in that process, we find where we are going.
I only see the answers as possibilities. It is possible that our existence makes practically no sense. And in one respect, it is possible because we know that in a billion or 2 billion years, the Earth will not be there anymore with life. And so, what do people become once they don't have an Earth to live on? To reach a planet of a distant star is a proposition of at least 1 million-year travel. So the counterpart is that somehow there is a complete spiritual world that is out of our reach, but it is there. And we're going to live in that world. But how do you and I can feel certain? We may feel comfortable believing that way. And many people accept their fate in life with a personal philosophy of that type. So I think, as I said at the beginning, it's a dilemma we have as human beings.
Absolutely. And within that dilemma, wisdom comes in, and people like you come in with their understanding of things, want give people to look at that perspective, understand it with their perspective, widen their horizons. And as human beings, we continue to move forward in this journey called life and existence. In a nutshell, what would you like to tell people about what you want to talk, and also anything else that did not get reflected in my questions?
I I think it goes back to how interested people like to develop a deeper view of why they live, and why they are who they are, and what made them who they are. Those are interesting questions, but not particularly necessarily interesting to everyone. So all I can do is put it out there and see how much it resonates. My book might just peter out as insignificant, or it might require a following, a deeper effort to understand. I think it's helpful to humans to have a deeper view, but not all humans are going to think that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. I am hopeful that more and more humans are, understanding things, especially, with the advent of AI. They have to fall back on humanity and the understanding of the wider self as well as the self itself.
Yes, I think AI will help dig into the questions uh, uh, with more finesse than the everyday uh, search for answers of human beings. Um, but we need to think whether AI will ever have emotions. Without emotions, they'll never attain the level of human understanding. And to me, that's an obvious question.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's an obvious question. But be that as it may, there is so much to learn from you, Pierre, and I'm sure also from your book. And I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect with you, want to get your book. What is the best way for them to do so?
Well, the book is on Amazon. Anyone with access to Amazon can put either they can look for the title of the book, or they can look for Brosens books, and the thing will pop up, and the order form and so on will be there. So I think that's
Wonderful.
not a problem at all.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Ajay, thank you very much.